topic of today, which is on our inner quest that we've been working on together for the last few weeks. We're looking at the path of adventure. And so I've actually been with the window open. It's -10 in Helsinki, but I'm not quite as far north as this Lapland video. But I thought it put me in the mood for today's topic. Jonas, thank you for joining. I put today your QR code at the top. So anybody who's following us and who wants to hook up with Jonas and see what he can offer in terms of psychology, there's a lot of currently, you correct me if I'm wrong, Jonas, but you've been working a lot with work therapy, helping people in workplace with HR managers. And so I just put that there in case you want to get in touch. But for today, let's just get straight into this topic of path of adventure, which is really, I would say, overhyped in social media, in Netflix and everything. It's literally the template for a lot of people's storylines, the hero's journey, Joseph Campbell going out, exploring and so on. So it's not something that is too mysterious for many, this idea of adventure. There's even a whole industry of travel and adventure selling that's out there. So maybe to start this, Jonas, how would you like to think about this path of adventure? Like if we're reframing it a little bit.
If we look at it beyond the level of jobs, because obviously not everyone is going to be adventurous for a living, I think it poses the question of the balance between risk and safety, right? Adventure, in the way most of us will experience it, is what am I actually trying to experience? Why am I trying to experience these things? What am I trying to actually feel? And how far am I willing to stray off the path? How far am I willing to deviate from my parents' expectations, society's expectations, what is familiar, what is comfortable? How much, metaphorically, am I willing to be like Bear Grylls? And, how deep into the forest am I willing to wander? And how much do I value drinking clean water versus my own pee? And it's an interesting way to think about our day-to-day lives, because in many ways, without realizing, we avoid risks or we take risks, and we're not always aware of the fact we're doing so, which makes risk taking in a safe way a bit difficult. So this often translates back to personality. You've got some people that are a bit more adventurous, more extroverted, more open to experience, and they'll typically be a bit more open to taking risks and wandering off the beaten path. And then you'll have some people who are naturally a bit more cautious and reasonable, who'll need more stimulation to actually go out and find something that's maybe a little bit more atypical or a little bit more risky. So I think that's the way in which it would be interesting for us to think about it today, is in terms of the different levels, the different archetypes related to risk taking, and how we can actually learn from that to make sure that we're taking enough risks in our lives, and the right type of risks, because chances are most of us are not already experiencing everything we want to experience, and the beaten path is definitely not something that works for everyone, right? The norm, the is essentially something that doesn't exist. Like go out there and point out one normal family that doesn't have any imbalances or anything. It doesn't exist. So in many respects, we need to learn how to take specific risks and how to dare to have a bit of an individual way of living, whether it's in our professional constellations, all the different things we do in order to pay bills, whether it's in how we use our free time, how we spend time with the people we love. What are we actually doing? Are we just sitting around the fire sharing music, or are we actually going and doing something that's a little bit more maybe stimulating or active or whatever it is? So yeah, in the broad sense of the term, that's how I understand this topic.
I'll just reframe this with the archetype wheel that's been our template for these different 15 sessions. And today, because we're going on the path of adventure, I'll zoom in a second and we can just have a look at the picture. If you're coloring it in, just as a reminder, the idea is to color in 3 different colors: the past, the present, and the future ones that you'd like to explore. And as a way to even, maybe why not, prompt ChatGPT to give you some interesting ideas. Latest fun we've been having with that is prompting ChatGPT with the Cards Against Humanity humor to give me suggestions of how I could be in my context of life with my LinkedIn profile as follows: an explorer, a nomad, and a guide. It's kind of hilarious. So worth trying, no guarantees. But the explorer is about we usually have the first one, which is the yin, the archetype that is focused on self. The second is focused more on other, and the third one is the mastery of both. So in this case, the explorer is focused on self and going out there, as the picture suggests, going out with wide arms stretched to the world and to the unknown. And the driving thing for the explorer is curiosity. So how am I cultivating curiosity, you could say? Like, exploring starts from curiosity. So what are you curious about? Is if I were to write down a journaling question for myself, I'd probably write, okay, what am I currently curious about? Really?
Yeah.
So the explorer, like, how have you embodied the explorer, or another way of putting it, Jonas, maybe is like, what can we make tangible around exploring and curiosity in terms of either your work or your own life?
I think the energy of curiosity often comes from some degree of lack, some degree of want. Like you become aware that something exists as a sensation or as a possibility, and then you feel a drive or a kind of a thirst for that specific feeling or activity or thing. So if I'm reflecting on my own personal path, yeah, I think curiosity very much first on the intellectual front, like trying to understand, wanting to understand what is all of this mess about and why is it the way that it is. Definitely coming from a place of lacking sometimes like that sense of security, like a certain atmosphere, a certain thing in the air that you just is uncomfortable. So you want to understand it in order to have some kind of control over it. Then it would be also on the physical sense in terms of experiences in sports, for example, like being outdoors, hiking, climbing, things like that. It is a form of curiosity, but it's not so much I want to see all the mountains. It's more I want to experience this as often as possible. I want to repeatedly be in this type of environment where, yeah, I get to feel this in the simplest sense of the term. So I think, yeah, curiosity often coming from a place of lacking something or wanting something, craving something. Um, and yeah, at that first level, it's already, I think, useful and important to just become aware of exactly what is it you seek. Because what you and I seek when we're out in the mountains might not be exactly the same way. And if we look at how we use nature, when we're out in the woods, like when you're out in the forests around Damisari, you're not doing exactly the same thing as I am. Like I would never take a speaker out into the forest, for example. Not that I judge it or have a problem with it, but that's not the way in which I choose to experience that specific environment. So it's often interesting. Okay, right, yeah, I feel an urge to go out into the forest more and to do more hiking. But what is it about that experience that actually tickles my fancy? What is it more about the tangibility of the experience? Like I get to prove my value to myself, my strength to myself, my resilience to myself, because I can hike for 1 week through the mountains self sufficiently. Or is it more about, no, I just love that environment. It's the smells, it's the sensory experience that gives me. I'm actually not too much into pushing. I hate that I have to have blisters and get eaten by mosquitoes for 3 days. If I could have that experience without the pain, that would be fine for me. So it's often interesting to question what we are actually seeking in an experience rather than just assume, oh, yeah, I'm just looking for that experience.
So the experience behind it, and I was just reflecting back on when you said curiosity and you gave some examples with nature. I think there's also curiosity about people, like the human nature. For me, it's been often that driving my curiosity has been people. I really, why are they doing that? What are they saying this for? What's behind it? They must have a good reason. I just really don't understand, and I'm curious to find out. And I sort of end up in some really weird situations where, I remember interviewing somebody in a work context for human factors work, like where we go out and we just talk to people, ask them green questions, get them to talk. And this was in an Itala project where I was interviewing about product design, and I ended up talking to this international drug dealer who obviously I'm not going to name, but I had a home visit from his Itala collection. And the thing that was driving me there. I realized afterwards it was a bit unsafe to be there alone without a colleague. But the thing that got me curious, the exploration drive, was just like, how does somebody end up buying 2,500 euros worth of Italo projects every week? What kind of person would want to do that? And then that's how I ended up meeting this particular person. Now, that drive for curiosity for me is what was behind this idea of bubble traveling, where everybody lives in bubbles. And like, so for me, the curiosity comes from exploring through bubbles, going to the underground bubble of the Samba community in Finland, which, by the way, is one of the biggest in Europe. People think it's tiny because it's cold and further north. So the bubble of Samba is like, I'm just curious to see why do Finns play Samba, and that's curiosity. So I get that. So your curiosity can be about the nature, can be outside of yourself through nature, through other people. And of course it could be also concepts, like philosophies. And then that, you can go and explore mysticism and go to an ashram or travel to the other side of the world on a spiritual retreat. Go to Joe Dispenza's workshops, or there could be curiosity on a sort of spiritual philosophical level. But I think this archetype is pretty clear. Maybe Jonas, did you want to add anything on that one before we look at the second one, which is the nomad?
I was reflecting on the potential flip side of this, because someone listening to this might be thinking, okay, great, there's this assumption that it's good to be curious, to go out, to explore, to put oneself in dangerous situations. But I'm wondering, if we flip this, is there, in your experience, a dark side or a wrong way to do this, or maybe some things to make sure that it actually goes well and is safe enough? Like, concretely, in practice, what have you done to explore, but without it being just something that's actively, potentially dangerous beyond reason, if you see what I mean?
Yeah, I just wanted to connect back to the word curiosity. Is in Old French, I think there was this saying that the curiosity is what killed the cat or something.
No, that's in English. Curiosity killed the cat. But
What's
there's
in French?
also in French, la curiosité est un vilain défaut.
That's it.
It's essentially it's a flaw. It's a
It's a
it's something that's
problem.
undesirable. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's true that curiosity cannot be, necessarily assumed to be a positive or a safe thing. Like in general, if we're talking about bubble traveling and just social curiosity, like I was mentioning, I would say the obvious precaution is operating with the basic international rules of respect in terms of boundaries, like
Mm.
respecting boundaries. And that's the big, international conflict topic. People behaving in ways that make others believe that their boundaries are being crossed and the sovereignty is in threat. So anything that is offered to you as a boundary, whether it's through gifting or invitations or don't assume the meaning of that without checking,
Yeah. Yeah.
because like you could say you could get yourself in all sorts of trouble by just being curious, but without realizing that either you're crossing somebody else's boundaries or that they're about to cross your boundaries without you having any consent.
Mm. I think to build on top of what you were saying, if I relate this back to my personal experience again, curiosity has sometimes unfortunate side effects that aren't necessarily bad for other people, but are definitely draining for oneself. I
Mm.
get teased by my partner and by my friends because of this. If there's one, like, to put it in a humorous way, if there's one crazy in the room, oh, you can be sure that they're gonna want to become best mates with me by the end of the night. I was standing in front of my good friend's like deli in Marseille the other day, and this guy walked past. I don't know. He just saw we were having a friendly he sensed that we were like friendly guys, and he stood there and for 15 minutes gave us his life story. And because I allowed just some of my natural curiosity to come out, this guy ended up like really talking to us and going oversharing way too much, and how he was homeless and his partner of 8 years had just left him, and how he just got into a fight because he was defending this junkie that had got ripped off by a dealer. So he went and he got into a fight with the dealer, but then he got his bag stolen. It absolutely mad story, like 15 minutes of a Tarantino movie about being homeless in Marseille. And this is one of the side effects that I face on a weekly basis, just because I still, to this day, apparently don't curb my curiosity enough. And I'm still giving out too open of a vibe to
Mm.
strangers, and I get this again just on a weekly basis, like the person at the shop's life story, just because I don't ignore them, and I just sense, I pick up on something, and I just say one word, and then boom, just it, yeah. So it might be a déformation professionnelle, as we say in French. It
Mm.
might be just a bias that comes from my work. That I also just have a tolerance for this stuff. Like I don't get phased to the same degree. So yeah, but in any case, to relate this back to the potential cost of curiosity, like yeah, you definitely will pay for that curiosity with energy in some way, and beware of energy vampires because they lurk in the shadows, so to speak.
In a way, what you just shared is not just the explorer, it's also the nomad to some degree, because nomad is about letting go of attachment. The second one is about sort of focusing on the notion of attachment, which is kind of what you're doing when you're like, as a therapist, you have to have a healthy practice of detachment and attachment with people's problems. Otherwise, you're in deep trouble. So, in that sense, the nomad is really focused on attachment, and in that way, when you were exploring, there's also a bit of the nomad going on there. And I think the nomad is a role that people often associate with, Tuaregs, Berbers in the desert with nice, beautiful dark blue clothing in the desert sun. But a nomad it can also be a digital nomad in the sense that you're completely rootless physically and you live digitally. Or it can be a nomad in the sort of work sense that you're working in the travel industry, or you're a very mobile salesperson and you're really nomadic. And so I think nomadic so again a metaphor for the archetype. It's more like the notion of you're not attached too much to any particular place. So Jonas, like maybe attachment is something we should open up a little bit in terms of, is there anything theoretical or practical from psychology around nomadism and attachment that you'd like to point out for us?
Yeah, let's maybe break it down into attachment to other people, which is
Mm.
very well conceptualized and understood in terms of attachment styles. You probably have heard about this related to your personal relationships and conflicts that you have with different partners. So, typically, the way this is broken down is you have different attachment styles based on your childhood and based on the experience you had of being reassured and how connected you felt to other people. Best case scenario, you end up having a secure attachment, which means that when things don't go your way, when you don't get exactly what you want, you still feel safe. Fundamentally, you feel that your partner still loves you and you still have worth, and it's you're able to accept some of these natural fluctuations in how satisfied you are with the current relationship and how connected you feel to your partner. So typically you're focused on the things that you can actually do and understanding things contextually. Oh, well, she's a bit distant this evening. It's not because she's cheating on me and she doesn't love me anymore. It's more that she's had a really tough week at work. And right now, obviously, she doesn't really have any energy left. So
Mm.
obviously, she's not going to be very warm and excited, and she's not going to be giving me a lot of attention and physical attention and love. But you know how to interpret that. Um, Avoidant, again, let's remember this is really popping up in the situations where we're not getting what we want, when we actually feel sad, disappointed, frustrated, or whatever it is. A more anxious or avoidant attachment style will typically then question themselves, oh, I must have done something wrong, right? Your partner comes home, they're distant, not giving you a lot of attention and love. Well, typically, yeah, that avoidant, anxious person would question themselves. I must have done something wrong. It must be my fault. It means that they have something else going on, or whatever it is. They'll start building up all these scenarios, but they will not actually put that on the table. They will then themselves maybe become a bit distant, and or needy and ask, "Is everything okay? Is everything okay? I can see something's not okay. I can see, but tell me what's wrong. Is it some?" And if there wasn't a problem before, you can be sure after 15 minutes of nagging, there will now be something wrong with you. And now it becomes personal. And then we've entered the self fulfilling prophecy of anxious attachment styles. Another style, which is very dangerous when combined with the anxious style, is the more ambivalent, um, which tends to be a mix of avoidant and anxious. So you'll have some difficulty sometimes relating and connecting to the person. So again, same situation, your partner comes home and they're not in a good mood, they're distant. Well, one time the ambivalent might actually be prodding and nagging, and another time they might be punishing by being sulky and distant. So the disorganized, the last one would be basically even more chaotic. But if you want to go into more detail, you can read a much more accurate description and breakdown than what I just word porridged right now. But the idea is that there are different styles of attachment, and typically we all land somewhere on the spectrum. And it's interesting to question how we attach to other people and how we respond when shit hits the fan. But I think more related to this path is maybe the more Buddhist sense of attachment, which is how attached we get to ourselves, the image that we have of ourselves. How attached do we get to material possession and our comfort, essentially? And that is one of the big barriers to overcome to reach the nomadic level on this path, because we will get attached to a specific place. Like, I don't want to move out of France, so I'm not going to explore beyond this, or a specific label we put on ourselves professionally. I'm only going to do what I've done so far, and that limits how far we can actually explore in this existence. Or it could be attachment to certain things about ourselves. Like today, you're detached enough from your professional ego that you don't feel the need to show up in a suit and tie to the streaming session. And the same with me. I'm here from my living room wearing what I would be wearing if I wasn't going to do anything for work today. And because that shows a certain level of detachment from a certain image that we're trying to give. So it's just, if you're trying to move forward and you want to move forward towards more nomadism. More than nomadic life. That's a weird one. You probably need to trade that for something you're attached to. You have to give in order to receive more of that experience. And typically it's going to be giving up something that's familiar, something that feels safe. It doesn't have to actually be safe. Like, we're not risking anything not being in a suit and tie right now, objectively. But if we want to explore even further, we will need to give up something for a greater good. So this relates back to also notions like self-discipline and the ability to delay gratification, the ability to deliberately choose to make oneself uncomfortable and go into the unknown and embrace, I don't know what it's going to be like. Let's find out within an acceptable range. But yeah, I think that's the way in which attachment really relates to this specific level of the path.
And in that attachment, I like the way you put it as also this almost spiritual detachment, like, how do I detach from my ego? How do I detach from the ideas and images I have of myself? It kind of, that takes us on a really interesting path also around reflection questions. So I just jotted down on a post-it here, one idea of a reflection question for this would be, what am I most attached to in ... my identity, my country, my work, my relationship to others, and so on. And then that's like a telescopic reflection question on attachment per se, that if I've done this recently I've done this, I'm selling my flat. So I had to let go of attachment to a really comfortable urban flat with nice nature, but because I want to embrace the experience of new. So then it's kind of like a process of detachment and opening up to possibilities and new. So I think that's where the guide invites others to go, look, well, when you are curious and that you do sort of metaphorically sacrifice certain attachments, you then have new experiences. And what might those be? And then the guide traditionally is the one inviting them to go into that experience of something new, even though it might be scary, unfamiliar, perhaps. And so what, as a guide, can you think of anybody or any examples of guide that would give us like a tangible view of guide and experience?
Yeah, I think it's super cliche, but it's very tangible, and I think a great example. It's actually our father, who is a human, so obviously is not perfect, and that's not obviously not anything that we expect or need from him. But I think where he really was able to do a great job was guiding us on certain topics in certain ways, certain specific experiences, right? He was a great role model and a great guide in that respect. I have a little anecdote from work, from the days where I was a pool boy. So I was working to pay for my university. I was doing construction on pools. I was building filtration systems and installing liners, all of that jazz. And my boss back in the day, who's called Michel Le Baron, who's an amazing human being and pool technician, he was old school construction guy, right? Never wearing gloves, always working just with his bare hands without really any safety precautions or anything. But still working very well, right? Just the product of experience, I guess you could say. And he was never really concerned with my safety. He saw that I was much more conservative and cautious than him. So he never really gave me any trouble about, like, put on gloves, do this, watch out, don't hurt yourself. But the one day where he was really out of character, as I was just opening a box, cutting something with a cutter knife, like a Stanley knife, and he freaked out. He was really saying, "Oh, watch out, I never use those, I'm terrified." And I was already a psychology student back then, so I was already a nosy little piece of shit. So I couldn't help but ask him, what is actually happening with the Stanley knife? Like, where is this coming from? You probably have a good reason for being this worried, right? And he told me that his dad, when he was growing up, was very strict and never let him use any of the dangerous tools or items. It was a simple case of, you're the child, so you're not going to do the dangerous stuff. You're going to watch me do it, but you're not going to do it. And to this day, now, this is this grown man who's afraid of using a Stanley knife when he is putting his fingers in electric boxes without cutting the fuse, just like feeling around it, like, oh, little electric shock, that's fine. But this guy's afraid of using a Stanley knife. So if I then relate this back to how our father dealt with the question of risk and safety, I remember situations where I was felling trees with him, climbing trees with saws. He took us climbing. He had us belaying him as children. He would tie me to a tree to offset the weight difference, and he would trust me with his life while he was climbing. And he very much had this approach where he would expose us to the risk gradually. I remember, to be able to use a chainsaw, I had to wait for years. And before that, I would help him and I would see. And he would explain to me why he was doing what he was doing in order to mitigate the risk as much as possible. And today I'm able to use a chainsaw without feeling terrified, and so far, touch wood, never cut any limbs or hurt myself or had any accidents, because he just helped us to develop that healthy relationship to risk by breaking it down for us into small steps and helping us to understand, this is the consequence of if you don't do this. You want to save 10 minutes? Fine, well, don't stack the wood properly, don't clear where your feet are, and then you'll risk slipping while you're holding the chainsaw while it's running. Is that a risk that you're willing to take? Does that feel like a good idea? Okay. And then you naturally kind of want to make it safe. But yeah, I think in that way, in climbing and construction, in many of those respects, he was a very useful mentor in order for us to develop that reasonable sense of risk, but also be able to experience lots of things, and in practice, also save quite a bit of money, because you and I have both been able to do a lot of stuff on our own houses and own flats because we were brought up in a family where we took that risk. We're like, well, I don't know how to make concrete. I'm going to learn. I'm going to do it on something that I can afford to screw up to some degree, and I'm going to learn. And eventually we were able to have quite a comfortable material life if you look at the salaries that our parents raised us with, essentially. So it relates to all these different things, whether it's our hobbies or literally saving money on construction bills. So I think in that sense, yeah, our dad was a good tangible example of a good guide in those areas.
I would definitely second that. I have memories of that with climbing as well, and just like, okay, you wanna belay your friend who's climbing a 12 meter full, well, here's how you do it, and do you trust them? Do they trust you? And how does it feel to slip? Try it. Okay, slip. Oh, okay. Did you see that you didn't actually hold him and he just started to slide down anyway? Try it again. I really had this fond memory of learning how to sort of look after other people in a climbing situation from that as well. And I think the end of this session is going to be on the the satsang, which is really where people often associate a satsang to the Indian idea of a group where there's a guru who sits on top of his high moral ground telling people how to think about life philosophically. We're using satsang in a more contemporary sense here, which is around sharing wisdom of experience. A bit like you would sit around a fire and talk about stories and share them as Christmas gifts, because they could be seen as just wealth of experience without having to actually a bit like before movies. You could imagine the satsang would have been the replacement for Netflix, where you share stories with each other about real or unreal things. And so if somebody really wants to go down that path of adventure, a really great practice to really, and that could be done on social media. It can be done face to face with family, with friends, with sauna talks. I've done this in saunas, satsangs. But Jonas, you and I have actually, I realized when I started to prepare this session, we've been doing satsangs with music for much longer than we've even had this picture up in the background. And we've been doing like these musical satsangs. Like today, I was just sharing with Jonas this example, which is we have this ongoing playlist of music that is just incredible. And we share it to each other and then have an online session where we do check-ins one after the other, where we share a song and why we've shared it as a gift. What's the experience that we're sharing behind it? This was the Beardy Man concert that I shared with Jonas. But so I think, Jonas, that's one idea that we've been actually practicing as a way of doing a satsang that's not just like sitting and preaching about philosophy, but is actually sharing experience. But can you think of any other angles to this, or maybe some reflection questions or examples about satsangs?
Yeah, I think if we look at a metaphorical way of looking at a satsang, it's whenever in an ideal case where every member of the tribe has gone off to live their own adventures in their own specific fields, and they've traveled, some socially, some intellectually, some geographically, some with their cooking, others with their personal experiences and relationships. And it's the moment where we gather around the fire and we share these insights and the fruit of our travels with each other. So it's nice when there's a bit of method to that madness. So if we look at some good old processes to do this, I think the Viking check-in is a very nice one, because it plans for the next adventures as well. It's like, these are the treasures I brought back from my pillaging, but the next round I challenge myself to go to Iceland and to start a colony there, or whatever it is. But so I think some of these formal conversation processes are actually quite interesting. Or if you look at it also in a professional sense, there's the topic of intervision, or the practice of intervision, which could be interesting to mention. So unlike a supervision where you have a supervisor, like the expert father psychologist who has all the experience, the patriarch sitting on the throne of knowledge, and then the little practitioners sharing what they've done and their struggles, and then daddy giving them a blessing or a punishment. The concept of an intervision is more, everyone is an equal participant around the table. We're all practitioners, we're all clinicians, but we have different experiences, different practices, and we get together to reflect on things that we found interesting, things that we found challenging, and we sometimes ask for feedback, sometimes we ask for reassurance, sometimes we ask for perspective. But the idea is it's this circle of equals where things are put on the table to be discussed and for collective intelligence to emerge on these topics. And it's generally a very pleasant practice and a very useful practice to have. So to relate this to something professional, you could reflect on, who is my group of peers? It doesn't have to be within your company. It could just be your equals in whatever field you are. And what would it look like to get together in a circle and to share our trials and tribulations, to share our pain points, to share our experiences, literally just to share our adventures, even just for the sake of having a laugh. Like, no one will understand your professional headaches as well as your peers. You know, like if you're a consultant, be like, oh, don't you hate it when you arrive and the client thinks they know what they want, when they have absolutely no idea of good practices and they get super attached to one specific feature, but in fact, it's absolutely not what they need. And then you have to babysit them into thinking that they've come up with the solution that you've had for them all along, or something like that, you know. So you will get even just enjoyment and fulfillment from surrounding yourself with your equals and sharing your adventures. and practicing the vulnerability that it requires as well. Detachment from ego, taking the risk of being judged or criticized. But if you're willing to pay that price, there's often a nice reward for you to reap as well. So that's how I would understand and try to make the satsang experience a bit tangible and concrete as well. And chances are
Works.
you're already doing it organically.
It works really well in saunas. It can be a bit left field for some, but it's quite easy to start a good satsang in a sauna in Finland, because if, for example, you go to a public sauna, which is where there's a lot of foreigners, like Allas, you just get this immediate satsang when people share experience of their travels. But also, if you like, you go to a family sauna, there's like quite nice moment for sharing, learnings and takeaways and experiences of life without them having to lead to advice, but just like sharing for the sake of sharing and having a laugh or helping each other out. So yeah, I've seen that here quite nicely, and that's why we played with this Viking check-in format, which is 3 rounds. But all that are just different ways of doing the same thing, like sharing experience. And social media, I think, has got all sorts of experiments with that, like Be Real in France, that social media that is so unique around sharing where you are and what experience you're having right now at that moment in time, and they push that notification. That's kind of I think it's kind of a mini digital experiment with the satsang concept as well. So being a guide doesn't presume that it has to be face to face. Like some people take that role on social media, and it becomes like they're the guide to the how to this, and they're the expert on that, and then they go down and share their adventures in a digital video form or something. So you can think of these three archetypes as roles that you would play within your work life, in your personal life, in your family life, or just as a general way of experiencing life. But it can also be digital, is what I'm saying.
In a way, what we're doing right now is similar to a satsang to some degree, in the sense that we're combining our respective adventures and life paths and experiences just on that specific topic of archetypes. But in a way, just the format that we're doing right now is, in a specific sense, a satsang of its own.
Yeah, exactly. And I think once we should try doing one of the musical satsangs and do it where you choose a song, I choose a song. Maybe for the next session, we could actually have a check-in and we can optionally film and see if it works out, and do where you choose a song about that life path, and I'll do the same. Put it in YouTube and comment the meaning that you put behind it as what's the experience behind that song that you're portraying. We've done this before. I think that could be fun to do on a stream format, Jonas. But hey, thank you for today. I'm going to end this stream here. If anybody wants to see the big picture of what we're doing and download it, of course, you can get that from my Koji links down. That's going to be like a downloadable high-res picture that you can then color in. And otherwise, I think we'll say not next week, but the week after, because you got a wood delivery. And thank you very much, Jonas.